Well, welcome to our final week of Be a Blessing. This week is going to be also on the subject of sharing your story. So earlier this year, my kids wanted to try to raise plants in buckets in our backyard. So they each got some little seeds, they planted them, and every day it was a different kid's job to go and water the buckets. And I got daily updates. Every time when I came home from work, one of the kids would say, "Hey, do you want me to tell you how my plant is doing in the bucket?" And as a good dad, I said, "Of course, tell me." And progress was slow. But even with the progress being slow, we started to see plants grow and get bigger and bigger as with patience and faithfulness, these plants grew. And this principle works with spiritual things too. I want to read about it in 1 Corinthians 3, 5-9. What is Apollos really? Or what is Paul? Servants through whom you came to believe, and each of us in the ministry the Lord gave us. I planted, Apollos watered, but God caused it to grow. So neither the one who plants counts for anything, nor the one who waters, but God who causes the growth. The one who plants and the one who waters work as one, but each will receive his reward according to his work. Do you see what's going on here? Growing plants is a slow process, but if you stick with it, you do get to the harvest. In week 1 of the series, Don shared about praying for our neighbors. And if you're using the app, when you pray for your neighbors, you can mark them with a prayed button. It turns that home red. Week 2, Margaret shared about listening to our neighbors. As we're praying for them, we're hoping that God answers those prayers. We get a chance to listen to them. Then Will shared in week 3 about how we get to eat with our neighbors. And hopefully you got an opportunity to eat with some of your neighbors over the past few weeks. Then in week 4, Leanne shared about serving our neighbors. And when you serve your neighbors, you're showing you care for them. And in that app, if you get a chance to serve one of your neighbors, you can mark them with that care button. And then last week, Aaron shared about sharing our story with our neighbors. And if you got a chance over the last week to share your story with one of your neighbors, in the app, you can mark that with the green share button. And man, that makes me so excited to see what God could do as we begin to share our story with the people around us. Now, unless God is doing something extraordinary, you're not going to get to share your story with all your neighbors in a week, or maybe even a month, or a few months. But if you will continue to pray and look for opportunities, you will get opportunities to listen to their story, to eat with them, and eventually to share your story. Over the past year, I've been praying more faithfully and daily for my neighbors. And I got the opportunity recently to serve as the president of our HOA. And through that experience, I've gotten many opportunities to get to talk to different neighbors. In fact, just recently, the neighbor across the street from me, his mother died. And I heard about it from one of my other neighbors. And I got to go and talk with them about spiritual things and even get to do the funeral with the family. My encouragement to you is, as you're praying for your neighbors, look for ways to serve them. And then as you're serving them, be careful about censoring yourself. Now, what do I mean by censoring yourself? Well, I remember back when I was working at my first job at Data Recovery Services up there on 360. I would go into work and people would ask me how I'm doing. I'd say, "I'm doing really good." Because most times I was doing really well. But then if I had something bad happen, I would censor myself. And this is how it would look. I'd go into Data Recovery Service and they would ask me how my life is going. And I would say, "Man, I'm kind of tight on money right now, but I'm sure it's all going to work out." Then that Sunday, I would come to Grace Community Church and people would ask me how my life is going. I'd say, "Man, money's really tight right now, but I'm praying that God is going to provide for me." Do you notice the difference in the two stories? One, at work, I didn't mention God. But when I got to church, I mentioned God. And the reality was I was praying to God to provide for me. And then when God provided for me, I would share a different testimony. At work, I would share, "Yeah, everything worked out." And then at church, I would share, "God answered my prayers." And this is what I think God wants to tell us, is as we go about our lives, as we're serving, as we're working, as we're living our lives, don't censor yourself. You be yourself. You be the same person at church that you are at work and in your neighborhood. Even Paul had to ask for boldness in this area in Ephesians 6:19, which says this: "Pray in my behalf that speech may be given to me in the opening of my mouth to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel." As Ferguson says, you can't spell bless without that final S. And just as the famous phrase says, "Preach the gospel in all the world, and if necessary, use words." Well, my encouragement to you is at the end of the day, when it's time to share our story, we must use words. Now I want to share a helpful tool with you that's been helpful and encouraging to me called the angle scale. And what this really showed me was it's not my job to always get a neighbor or a friend or a coworker all the way to disciple. What's my job is just not censor myself, share my story, and encourage someone to get closer to God. I had a boss back in my old job at Alvarez Marcel that I liked a ton. And when I first came there, he was pretty much an atheist. And an atheist is someone who has no awareness of God whatsoever. And then as I prayed for him and I talked to him about spiritual things, I saw movement in his life. I saw him moving closer to where he was aware of God. And maybe he had an interest in Jesus. And even though he didn't get all the way to maybe making a decision to surrender his life to Christ, he moved in that time with him. And my prayer is that other people who are working with him now maybe finished that job, kept watering those seeds. So my encouragement to you is to keep praying that someone will move along the scale from maybe no awareness of God to some awareness of God. Maybe from some awareness of God to making that decision to surrender their life to Jesus. And then it doesn't stop there. Then it's ongoing growth. And then it's all the way to becoming a full disciple of Christ. And as a reminder of what Aaron shared last week, I want to repeat again, you want to share your story in 3 parts. You want to share what your life was like before Christ as the first part of your story. Then you want to share, how did you meet Christ? How did that happen? And then you want to share that third part of where you are now on your spiritual journey. And that question of where you are now on your spiritual journey is a great question you can ask anybody. You can ask a neighbor, you can ask a coworker, and it works for a new Christian, it works for a Hindu, it works for a Buddhist, it works all over the place. So I want you to use that question where you are on your spiritual journey with people you meet. And then when you share your story, you can share your spiritual journey in the same way. What you were like before Christ, how you met Christ, and now what Christ has meant in your life. And this is the pattern that Paul uses. In Acts 22, Paul gives this same 3 parts of his story to a Jewish audience. And then fast forward a couple of chapters in Acts 26, Paul gives this same pattern of his story, but this time it's to a Gentile audience. The pattern stays the same, but sometimes the words that you use and the stories you tell will change a little bit, depending on who you're sharing your story with. And so feel free to not have to do a speech, just share what God has done in your life with those around you. And what's encouraging about the way that Paul did it is how fast it was. If you read these verses in your discussion guides, it only takes a couple minutes to hear Paul's story in its entirety. Same way with us. Our story shouldn't take us 20 minutes. It should take a few minutes to share your story with others. I want to give you 3 quick suggestions on sharing your story. The first suggestion is don't force it. Don't force it. Don't feel like you have to get this story out every day. You know, if God gives that opportunity, that open door, man, walk through it. But many times, if we're doing the things we've talked about in this series, if we're listening first, if we're eating with people, allow God to open the door for you. Allow God to open that opportunity for you. Don't just jump in there. Now, sometimes God does open that door. I remember that first HOA meeting I went to, and there was that opportunity where they said, do you want to serve? And then one person said, hey, Jonathan, would you share a little bit about yourself? I thought, wow, God, this is my opportunity to share that I love Jesus and I love my neighbors and I want to serve them. And so, of course, I took that opportunity. So if God opens the door, you take the opportunity. What a cool thing. But if God is just saying, love this person, care for this person, don't feel like you have to force every conversation to be about Jesus. My second suggestion is what I mentioned before. Don't censor yourself. You be the authentic you in all the different places you are. So if you talk about God at church, then the next day talk about God at school. If you talk about sports on a Monday, talk about sports on a Tuesday. I'm just saying, don't change who you are to fit your world. Just you be you. Allow God to come through you to the people around you in your words. And my final suggestion for you is when you share your story, share your experience, not someone else's. This is what the Bible says for us to do in 1 John 1:1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. You share your direct experience with Jesus, how you met him, what you have heard him, what he has done in your life. That is what is powerful to other people, what you have experienced, not telling a story of another person's experience. And I want to end this session together with a verse I mentioned earlier, which is going to be our memory verse for this week. It's Ephesians 6:19, and it says this: "Pray in my behalf that speech may be given to me in the opening of my mouth, to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel." My prayer for each and every one of you is that you'll be bold in how you speak about the gospel, not just this next week, but for the rest of your lives.
Well, as we come to the end of our series on being a blessing, let me just urge you, don't let this be the end of applying what you've learned. Continue to begin with prayer, and continue with prayer for your neighbors. Listen. Keep listening to them, learning ways that you can love them. Eat. Continue to eat with them. Invite them over. It builds relationships. Serve them. Look for ways that you can serve them, because serving communicates genuine love. And the last S to the word bless, story. Keep sharing your story as God gives you opportunity. See, God has sovereignly placed you strategically where you live, where you work, where you go to school, even where you do your hobbies and you recreate. Pay attention to those relationships that God has put you around, and think about, how can I be a blessing to those people? So keep applying what you've learned. And as you do that, not only will you be a blessing to many other people, but you will be greatly blessed yourself. So as we finish, I just want to say, God bless you. Continue to be a blessing. And I look forward to seeing you on Sunday.